John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to John Constantine, the Hellblazer podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 134, and just a little catch-up on what's been going on. In the last story arc, Garth Ennis returned for a 5-issue little story arc, and in that, we learned a little bit about John's past, where he, at one time in the 80s, had helped out a mobster named Harry Cooper, whose son was killed. I say helped, but actually, he was kind of forced to bring the child back to life. Of course, John does not know necromancy or any way to do that. So he actually just possessed the boy with a demon and then got the hell out of there. So he was hoping that was all forgotten. But of course, he gets wrapped up again in his later life when little Ronnie, the child that was possessed, is now taking over that mob family. And it was a pretty crazy story overall. I mean, little Ronnie tried to birth the Antichrist through his father, and John had to stop that. And of course, he did stop it. But there was a lot of craziness that happened with it. Like, we found out the demon had a giant penis and would use that to kill people, which is pretty dang horrific. And pretty much that was it. John defeated the Antichrist and that demon, sent him back to hell, and it was left with the demon saying, you know, when you die, I'm going to get you. And that's where we left off. So first things first, with issue 134, we got the cover. We see John leaning against a wall, and the wall is covered with graffiti, and John is smoking, and he's looking down at something, and he's looking like he's trying to figure out what happened. And we can't really see what's down there, but we do see one ominous thing, and that is the arm of potentially a dead person. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Warren Ellis with art by John Higgins. So I guess John Higgins started in the Garth Ennis arc and just continued. And as we turn to the first page, we see John asleep in a bed as the sun comes up, and apparently John does not like shades or any kind of privacy because his window is just fully open, allowing the sun to blare through the window. And we see on this page that the name of this issue is Haunted. And of course, that sun shining through the window, nice and bright, wakes John up, and he rolls over. And on the floor next to his mattress, which doesn't have like a frame or anything, it's just a mattress on the floor, is a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. So he picks those up to start his day. And as he opens the carton of cigarettes, he sees that there's only one left. And as he pulls it out, he realizes it's broken. And as he stares at the broken cigarettes in front of his face, he says, "Oh, bollocks." So instead of not smoking or something like that, I mean, he's got to smoke. It's morning. He just woke up. So, of course, he's got to smoke. He takes the cigarette that's broken, pinches it together where it is broken to try to hold it in one piece. And then he lights it, and he sucks very hard at the end to try to get it to light. And it seems like it does. Some smoke starts to come out, but the smoke is mostly coming out from the middle as he tries to suck as hard as he can at the end of it. And as he attempts this multiple times, he stands up and begins to walk into the bathroom to get ready. Of course, John doesn't sleep with clothes on, so as he stands up and the blankets fall off of him, he's stark naked. We don't see everything, but we do see his bum. And as he walks, his narration says, "When the letting agency says unfurnished flat, they mean it. The rooms in this rented hole have no carpets at all, and the only seating I've got is a few cardboard boxes full of the accumulated shit of 40-odd years above ground." Then we see John walk into the living room. He's still trying to light his cigarette, and he's still naked. We do see some women in a window as he walks by, and they are kind of smiling at him. And his narration continues, "No curtains on the seedy old windows either. I'm probably scaring the HRT patch off that nosy old bitch across the road. The one who hangs out outside her house with her 18 screaming kids from dawn till fucking dusk every day. If there was ever anything decent on TV, the birth rate would plummet. Thump at the door. The glue-sniffing paper boys managed to get it together enough to actually deliver the paper this morning. Wonder if there'll be any snot and blood all over it again." So it seems John has got a new apartment, and I guess even though it said it wasn't furnished or anything, John thought that meant there was some accommodations, but apparently there aren't. So much so that there aren't even curtains or blinds on the windows. So we see John go over to the door to get the newspaper, and as he picks it up, he sees the name on it, which we don't really see, but he says, "Wrong bloody newspaper again." Then we see him leaning against the counter as he flips through it, and he says, "Tits on page 3. not an ounce of news. But as he keeps flipping, it seems something catches his attention because he looks down and it seems like maybe he's read something really bad because he drops the paper to the floor and it looks like he begins to cry and he says, "Oh, Isabel, poor bloody Isabel." So it seems John got to the obituaries and he saw one for someone he knows named Isabel. Then we turn the page and we cut to John sitting on a park bench in a park, and he's just kind of watching everybody go by and everybody else in the park. And one of the other people in this park is a kid on a bench who was just out in the open, I guess doing whippets. I'm not sure exactly what these are, but it's some sort of aerosol can that this kid is just huffing whatever's inside the compressed nitrogen or some sort of refrigerant that is getting him high. And as John watches this, we see a white guy in a suit sit next to him. And as the guy moves to sit down, he sees what John is staring at and he comments, "I had one like him the other day. Little girl. She did 5 cans of that. Froze her lungs solid. 9 years old." And without even looking at the man, John says, "Hello, Watford. Life in the police still a little ray of sunshine every day, is it?" And then John flicks his cigarette away and he throws it right in the middle of a bunch of pigeons, so they all scatter. And then John opens another pack of cigarettes, and as he opens the pack and pulls another one out, Watford answers saying, "Never been a better time to be a copper, John. Thought we'd miss a Tory government something chronic, you know? But this new lot? Tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Great stuff. Things get worse every bleeding day. It's like Maggie never left office." And then he gives kind of a weird smile like he's remembering the good old days, and he rubs his hands together and he says, "Lovely jubbly," which I have heard before, but I never really thought to look it up. So this time I did because I had no idea what that meant in context. And apparently it's just a slang way to say excellent, brilliant, or great. So as Watford is smiling to himself, John interrupts his thoughts saying, "Glad someone's having fun. Listen, I've got a favor to call in." And at the word favor, Watford gets a sour look on his face and he kind of huffs to himself. And then John says, "Don't get the hump with me, Watford. You know the score. Old friend of mine popped her clogs the other night. Made the papers, but they buried it in last week's lottery numbers. A 4-line job, know what I mean? I want details, Watford." And Watford asks, "Has it got a name?" And I want to point out that he said it for Isabella. And he goes on through the rest of the comic referring to, I guess, her body, but maybe her person as it. And as John pulls out his lighter to light the cigarette, he says, "Isabel Bracknell." And Watford says, "Heard about that one. Found it in some squat, didn't we? Brixton way?" And then he leans back like he's trying to remember and he says, "Now that I think about it, I saw the pictures." And as he says this, he gets a really creepy smile on his face. And John asks, "Pictures?" And as he asks this, we do see him put the cigarette away. So it seems that his lighter was out of fluid, so it wasn't lighting. And as he puts his cigarette away, Watford answers about the pictures. "Yeah, it was pretty. Want it? Nice lips on it. You could see it used to be a little cracker." And then John asks, "How the fuck did you get to see a picture of her? Your robbery squad. It ain't your patch." And Watford, who's still leaning back and closing his eyes like he's trying to remember the picture vividly, says, "The pictures of the pretty ones always get around, if you know the right people. Some of the lads get a bit of time with them sometimes, you know?" And John has had enough of Watford, so he says, "You know, Watford, you're starting to piss me off. I could always make a phone call, you know. Tell someone exactly what happened in Watford High Street that night. I mean, what little they do know is so fucking good that everyone's been calling you Watford ever since." And at this, Watford gets really big eyes, and then he puts his hands between his legs, and he looks down and says, "Bastard." And then John, now cool and collected, says, "Now, I want details. I want to know how Isabel died. Everything you have. And I want it on the hurry up, all right?" And Watford, who's still looking down, says, Yeah. Give me a day or two." And then John, without even answering, stands up and begins to walk away. And Watford asks, "What's occurring here, John? Were you screwing it or something?" And we don't see John's face, but we do see his hand. And I might be interpreting this wrong, but it looks like his hand is flexing or balled up like he's trying to not punch Watford in the face. And he says, "Nah, I haven't seen Isabel in 6 or 7 years. You know where to find me." Then we turn the page and we see John walking down the sidewalk. Behind him, there is a big billboard that says New Labor, New Britain. So I'm assuming somewhere around 1999, the Labor Party in Britain changed their stance on some things and got a little bit more, I guess, right-wing. But I'm just guessing that, of course. So as John walks, his narration says, "Kid once said to me, if you want to live in the city, you better have your name written on it somewhere." And just as he says that, he sees a kid spray painting graffiti on a wall, and the kid and him kind of make eye contact for a second, and John's narration continues. "London magic. Get your name on it. Own it. Save yourself from it. There's magicians everywhere." And I guess he's just referencing this kid who I assume is writing his name on the wall. But John doesn't stop or do anything as he passes the kid. I should also mention the kid has definite 90s fashion. He's got like a camo gray jacket on with a buzz cut, but it is dyed pink. And then he's got a bunch of piercings, like one on his eyebrow, one on his lip, 3 on his ears. And I'm not sure if this is supposed to mean something or if it's just that's how people looked in the 90s. So like I said, John keeps walking past that kid, and he goes into a corner store, and he goes up to the register and holds out a bill and says, 40 silk cut, a disposable lighter, and stick your national lottery tickets up your arse. And it's not like John just says this out of the blue. I believe he knows this guy, so they have like a running banter, I'm assuming. Because as the man behind the counter turns around, he says, "Suit yourself. It could be you, you know. Roll over on the lottery jackpot this week. 14 million. And the guy behind the counter, I think, is supposed to be either Indian or Pakistani. And as he gets John the carton of silk cut cigarettes, John fires back about the national lottery. And twice as many gullible twats, paying what amounts to another fucking tax. Makes me sick. And the new bloody government didn't get rid of it, just to make me even bloody sicker. New labor, old bollocks." And as the cashier rings up the cigarettes and lighter, he says, "Didn't you vote for him, John? I thought you were a labor man from way back." And as he's being rung up, John picks up the lighter, and he shakes it next to his ear, I guess to check to make sure it has fluid. And he replies, "I was. This ain't labor how I bleedin' remember it, Sanjay. More like bleedin' Thatcher how I remember it." And as John opens his pack of cigarettes and removes one, we see Sanjay's wife coming from the back, and she's bringing him tea. And as he takes it, Sanjay says to John, "You're in a foul mood this morning. You trap it in your zip or something?" And John answers, "Nah, old girlfriend of mine died the other day. Only found out about it this morning. Rotten start to the day, know what I mean?" And Sanjay replies, "Sorry to hear that, mate. Did she pass on gentle like?" And John answers, "Don't know yet. Probably not. That's what I've got to find out." And as he says this, we get a panel of John waving goodbye to Sanjay's wife, who goes back into the back room. And I'm not sure if they're insinuating anything here, because John's smiling as he's waving to her, and then Sanjay turns around, and it looks like he's got kind of a scowl on his face as he looks back at where she left. And Sanjay says, "That really your job, John? She's going to have a family, maybe even a new fella. You won't want to piss about in it, mate." And then he takes a sip of tea, and then John lights a cigarette and turns around and begins to walk out and says, Yeah, I do." Then we turn the page, and we cut to what looks like some sort of 50s ballroom or something. We see people dancing in the center of a bunch of tables. There was what looks like a big band, and it looks to be some sort of nightclub, but it's full of old people. And we see one of those elderly people sitting at a table with John, and she says to a man who's standing at her table, "This is John Constantine, dear. Visits me once a year, regular as clockwork, except when he doesn't." And then the man standing at the table asks, "Who?" And the woman answers, "Constantine, dear. Everyone knows dear John. He's a face, dear. He's in our game." And the man replies, "Another fucking magician. Shit." And then he walks away angry, and the woman turns to John and says, "You'll have to excuse Albert. Court magician to the Cray twins he was. The little thugs ruined his manners. So, how are you, John?" And John answers, "Well, I've got to be honest, Clarice. I'm a bit shit right now. Old girlfriend of mine turned up dead in the papers this morning." And I should describe Clarice because she's an older woman, but she kind of dresses like a modern day 90s girl. She's got on a strappy black dress with a choker, and she's got really short hair, but she is all like skin and bones and wrinkles. And when I say skin and bones, I mean like almost skeletal with skin. So she goes to pour herself some tea, and we see John has kind of a sour look on his face, like he's remembering Isabella, and he wants to figure out what happened. And Clarice actually says kind of sarcastically, Hope she didn't crease the sports pages for you, dear. Oh, come along, John. Smile. Then John lights a cigarette and says, Not funny. I'm having it checked out now. Her death, I mean. The papers were vague, but she didn't die quietly, know what I mean? And Clarice answers, Are you just looking for something to get angry over? And John turns to her, maybe offended a little bit, and says, What? And she replies, Oh, come on. This is you all over. Sticking your hand in something nasty, getting good and pissed off, getting the blood flowing. Vintage John Constantine. And, of course, don't forget the bonus number. A beautiful girl, dead and mysterious, exciting in horrible circumstances. You can get all Marty over her grave in the rain. And John fires back, Oh, fuck off. But she cuts him off, continuing, saying, John, I've known you a long time. I know you. I've known what you are since I went down on you in Highgate Cemetery when you were 24 years old. You're an adrenaline junkie. And then she gets in John's face and says, Don't turn some poor dead girl into today's fix. She can't deserve that. And with that, John throws his cigarette into her tea, and I guess he walks out, because as we turn the page, we see John exiting the train station. And of course, John's pulling out a cigarette and he's lighting it, and his narration says, Brixton's always been a filthy fucking hole, but it's got life to it. Gets trendy once every few years. Fused onto it is Stockwell. Stockwell's as mundane as a London borough gets, but there's money hiding in it. I've often seen Stockwell feed Brixton. Here's the obvious. The alley you take to walk to Stockwell from here has a wine bar and a continental cafe on it, but it's difficult to find, the line between them, like the singles and couples with a bit of cash, and the artists and DJs who want it have together scuffed it with guilty heels, the area where Brixton becomes Stockwell. And in the next line, John does an imitation of that kind of divide between the two cities, like when one becomes the other, because he does one kind of accent and then goes into another one. So he says, where I'm off Donver fucking Cold Harbor Lane. And did you see that silly twat throw himself on the rails at Brixton Tube? Bleeding fragile he was. Becomes, no, I'm in Stockwell. Big council flat that I'm paying absolute pennies for. And there's a nice club or two on Cold Harbor Lane. And a gallery, too. And that's where his impression of the two different people from the two different parts of town. And his narration continues. And that little gap in the middle, where women with cut glass accents and names like Kira or Mira drink down the King George and say things like, no, of course I don't have a job. It's hard enough just to be yourself, don't you think? And put their lipstick back on straight after an educated blowjob in their bedsit. That fault line between Brixton and Stockwell, that's where Isabel started. She ended up on the wrong side, and I only wonder why. Then we turn the page and we see John on the steps of what we can assume is Isabella's house because there's a police caution tape on the front. And as he walks past the tape, he says, Watford? And when there's no response, he says, come on. You sent one of yours to find me to tell me to meet you here. Don't arse me about. I was up at the crack of sparrow shit this morning, and it's not put me in the best of temper, as you might have noticed earlier, you bastard. Then we see Watford come out of a room and say, in here, John. That's what's-name's bedsit, Bracknell. So he's talking about Isabella Bracknell is her last name. And as John walks over to the bedroom and enters, Watford says, turns out I was owed a few favors by the lads at Serious Crimes. We've got a bit of time, until the chief super turns up with his mistress anyway. And right here, I guess he's implying that the chief superintendent shows up at murder scenes in general, but I guess Isabella's house, to use as a place to have sex with women, since he knows that no one's in the house. And of course, John is disturbed by that, and he asks, you what? And as he enters the room, we do see the bed that Isabella, I guess, was killed on because it's covered with blood. And there's like a big spot in the middle, and then the walls have blood spatter all over it as well. So it looks like it was a very violent death. And Watford answers John saying, Superintendent Milham, on the strength at Hackney Road. Apparently his girlfriend spunks like a bloke if you do her at a murder scene. And he wrote up, this is where it lived and died, Bracknell. So he keeps having to say the last name here because he refers to Isabella as it, and then he's letting John know he's referring to Isabella. And he continues saying to John, Serious crimes in Soko have been through here like a dose of salts. Stripped the bed, as you can see. There was lots of Bracknell in it. And John asks, will I fuck it up for Dabs if I nose around a bit? And Watford answers, nah, Soko will have lifted any fingerprint worth lifting by now. You get your butcher's look in, son. Have a laugh. And then John turns from Watford and he begins looking around the room and he goes to her bookshelf and he sees a diary on it and he asks, all right then, Watford, tell me, how did she die? And then Watford pulls out the police report and as he reads it, he says, okay. It enters the house at 3:35 a.m. There's a communal toilet on the upper floor. It goes straight up there for a piss, pisses through scabs, doesn't flush. And John stops to ask, scabs? And Watford answers, here, hold on, I have visual aids. And then he opens the crime file to John and he shows him pictures. And John looks at it with disgust, saying, looks like an old peach riddled with buckshot. And Watford says, that's your girl's arse, son. VD. So apparently Isabella had some sort of venereal disease, and the crime scene people took very, very detailed photos of that. And also, if you remember, the police borrowed these photos, and Watford had implied that they used them for sexual purposes. And that would be gross either way, but that just makes it extra gross. And then Watford begins reading from the case file again, and he says, and he wrote up, I guess to say, any way you can get your rocks off. And he continues saying what Isabel did that day, saying, it has a quick wash. We've got the flannel, pus and cum. And John is shocked by this and asks, oh, what? And Watford answers, it was on the game, John. No two ways about it. Waiting for the blood work to tell us what else she had. And I guess the game he's referring to is prostitution. And then he opens the file again to John, showing him another picture and says, here's another. Inside left thigh. It's a brand. You can still make out what it says. Babylon. And then he goes back to reading the file saying, downstairs it comes. It's not actually checked its room yet. Why should it? The locks are shit on these bedsits. You could bash the lock barrels out with a hammer if you had to. Bracknell's killer was inside already. He hit Bracknell in the left temple with his hammer. The bone went in like an eggshell tapped by a spoon. It never had a chance, John. Once it took that hit, it was game over for Bracknell. And as Watford says this last thing, we see John rifling through some more books, and then he takes the diary and maybe another book and puts them inside his jacket. Then he turns to Watford, who has a very creepy look on his face like he's getting off reading this whole report. And Watford continues saying, we figured on 5 or more shots with the hammer before he went to work with his hands. Used Bracknell's head to bash down the fixtures and fittings. Bracknell was still breathing when he put it on the bed and got his Stanley knife out. First, he cut out Bracknell's implants. Hip and trendy thing to do these days. Sticks shit under your skin, fucking scum. And right here, he's referring to the people who put stuff under their skin, like breast implants or other things, and he's calling them scum as opposed to the guy that murdered Isabel. And he continues saying, he left them all at the foot of the bed. The highlights of the list? Stainless steel balls, rods, etc. Approximately 2 pounds. Pre-war masonry nails. 3. Aborted fetus. 1. Preserved. Reasonable supposition waiting for confirmation from the hospital is that said fetus is the aborted child of Bracknell. I. And then he opens the case file and pulls out a picture and shows it to John and says, then he thought fuck it and went for her face. Here. And then we don't see it at first. John looks very distraught as he sees the picture. And then we get to look at it and we see Isabella's face bloody and beaten with a hammer, and one of her eyeballs is missing, and her face has been cut up with a razor, and her cheeks have been cut open almost like the Joker. Then we turn the page and we cut to John walking out of the room and out to the street. And over these panels, Watford continues to narrate from the case file saying, he produces his last weapon, a 7-inch flathead screwdriver. First, he uses it like an ice pick on arms and legs, splitting them open. Then he jams it into Bracknell's belly and levers it up. Only then does Bracknell die. It shits itself immediately upon death, and blood flows that all over the bed. He's gouged a terrible hole in its upper right leg by now. It reminds him of something. The killings got him hot and bothered. He wants it. And that, my son, leads us into his last act on Isabel Bracknell. I imagine it was Bastard glad it was dead already, to be honest. Romeo has it away on his toes by 4:05, leaving nothing but blood and muck behind him. And that was how Isabel Bracknell died. Happy now? And as John walks out of the apartment, he sees a playground across the street, and he begins to walk over to it, and it looks like there is a shadow of someone in there. And as he goes to it, he sees a woman dancing, and she has a bubble wand in her hand, and as she spins, bubbles are surrounding her and blowing around in the wind, and the woman just looks like she's having a blast. And then as John gets closer, he realizes something, and his eyes get very big as he says, "Isabel." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planetrains and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.